Prof. Vogel, welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you.
Do you think Japan needs to apologize more to China?
I think that if Japan would be more deeply apologetic and would put in their textbooks more about the horrors that they have done, it would probably make them less vulnerable to criticisms by China. I don't think it would change things basically. I think China has its basic foreign policy considerations, but at times when things are tense, China can always pull out the lack of apology to create problems with Japan.
So what's stopping Japan from making this apology, so to say, and getting it out of the way that Germany has?
I think for one thing, Japanese like to feel that their grandparents or their great-grandparents were serving the country, and they feel that people who've done bad things in history, the way the Belgians did in Belgian Congo or the Americans did to American Indians, are not constantly thrown up in their face. And many younger Japanese are tired. They say, why should I apologize for things that happened before I was born? And they say, we apologized already, and why is China pushing us? What's the purpose of continuing to criticize us? The Japanese know that they did bad things in World War II. They realize a lot of countries have done bad things, and they want to improve relations, but they don't feel that they are uniquely bad people, and they would like to think that they are trying to pursue peace and do good things in the world, and that was over 70 years ago, mostly before the people were born.
Many people don't realize, but Japan was a major contributor of foreign aid to China in the 1970s.
That's quite right. The Chinese need to say thank you more. Japanese need to apologize more. And the Japanese feel that ever since 1895, a lot of Chinese have gone to Japan to study and learn things, and that the Japanese were actually very generous after 1978 in helping China. They were giving more aid, more technological assistance to China than any other country, and that they were doing that as a substitute for reparations, and they understood that that was given instead of reparations, and the Chinese leaders acknowledged privately at the time that that's what the meaning was, but that the Chinese have not done so much publicly, and many Chinese are completely unaware of that.
Do you think that China-Japan relations can move towards a real friendship and doesn't have the war always brought up?
My own estimate is that relations are likely to improve now. I think since 2010, when the Chinese economy surpassed that of Japan's, the relationship was readjusted, and now they're trying to come to terms with that new readjustment. But I don't believe the Japanese are going to feel comfortable in being real friends, because when they saw the pictures of Japanese business being trashed on television, when they see Chinese planes and ships attacking near the Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, and when they look at the movies of World War II, with the Japanese have seen on television from China so prominently, so many times.
Which seem to demonize the Japanese.
Oh, absolutely. And the Japanese are worried that if Chinese domestic problems should get very serious, and they wanted to start some fuss around the area, that it would be quite popular in China to become anti-Japanese again. They don't feel confident that they can rely on China to remain friends over a long period.
You don't think that President Xi's current overtures to Japan indicate that there's a willingness to have a separation between what is considered to be nationalist type feelings, which the Chinese perhaps use the demonization of Japan to bolster up their own domestic national feeling, and economic ties? Because China is Japan's largest trading partner, and for China, Japan is their second largest trading partner after the US.
There is a very deep interlinking, but I think from the Chinese point of view, they feel that they are now in the strong position, that the power that they worry about is not Japan but the United States. The Japanese have a slogan that economics between China and Japan are hot and that politics are cold. I think politics could become lukewarm. I think that when Xi Jinping visits Japan in April, they are likely to have some improvement, but that doesn't mean they'll be close friends.
The commentators who say that President Xi's visit to Japan is China's attempt to kind of slowly move Japan away from the American, so to say, grip.
If I were Japanese and thinking where my dangers would come in the future, I don't think I would worry about what the United States would do to me, but I would worry about what the Chinese might do. And there's no way that the Japanese military budget can compare with China's in the future. In that situation, I think that the Japanese still feel that if there was some kind of emergency or difficult issue, they would want to rely on the United States so that they keep a very deep defense relationship with the United States. But I think that they feel that they can calm things down and have better working relationships. That if we treat them like an enemy, they can become an enemy.
The relationship between Japan and China, when Japan realized that China was going to overtake it in 2010. But the parallel now is, of course, how are Americans going to react when China overtakes the United States?
The worst tensions between China and Japan were in the period from about 2008 to 2012. In 2010, a ship from China banged into a couple Japanese ships. In 2012, the Japanese declared that the island of Senkaku were now owned by the Japanese government. They were purchased from a Japanese company, and the Chinese called that nationalization. Those tensions were very serious. But I think the deepest emotion that was going on in those periods came from the fact that for the first time since 1895, China was now gaining the upper hand. In 2008, there was the global financial crisis. Japan suffered deeply and China didn't. 2008, Beijing did a spectacular Olympics that gave them enormous pride. In 2010, the World Bank declared that the size of the Chinese economy was bigger than that of Japan. And so for Chinese who since 1895 have felt that the natural place of China and Japan, the natural place of China being superior, was finally coming around. And you can imagine the pride of many Chinese people who felt, now it's our turn. And the Japanese had been sometimes quite arrogant, certainly in World War II, and even the businessmen pranced around as if they had a superior position. Now we're gaining the superior position. So now we have a new situation where China is the country that's the stronger, more political influence, bigger economy. And so they're trying to readjust and work out a new peaceful relationship on that basis. The United States is now beginning to go through that period as the Chinese economy surpasses that of the United States. But the problem with the United States and China is much deeper and is going to be harder to resolve. The United States has a military relationship where it feels it's the strongest power in the world. And for those who feel it's their responsibility to defend our country against any other country, especially one that's communist, authoritarian, does not respect human rights among the Uyghurs, does not respect human rights in Hong Kong, the American people feel this is a very different kind of country. And that particularly since China has been advancing and building little islands in the South China Sea. If you were a planner in the Pentagon, you would be pretty worried that this is a country you're going to have to worry about.
So you're saying that China's economic surpassing of America will not go over as so comparatively peacefully as it was when China lapped Japan.
Will the world have a single integrated worldwide economy? Are we in many areas are we going to see a split between Chinese and the American economy? Many of the American companies that felt they were working with China quite well feel they're no longer as welcome, and that the Chinese government helps their firms and making it very difficult. Google cannot operate in China the way it operates in the United States. So there's a feeling in America that they haven't played by the same kind of rules. Many of us who study China feel that the mood in Washington is far overblown, that the Chinese have done far more to adapt. There are far more people to work in China we can work with, and feel that we have to work with them in a much more positive way, that if we treat them like an enemy, they can become an enemy.
This view of yours actually prompted you, together with a group of other diplomats and academics and what you called in the old days the intelligentsia, to write a letter, an open letter to President Trump, titled, yes, China's not the enemy last year.
A year or two before, there was an influential article in Foreign Affairs that said engagement has not worked. And that seemed to many people to embody a Washington consensus that China was really something to worry about and that we ought to really unite and be very tough with China. Many of us who worked on China felt that there are a lot of people in China we can work with. There are a lot of positive forces, and the world would be better served, both China would be better served and America would be better served by finding ways we can work with each other. And we felt that that mood that was expressed by the so-called Washington consensus was not a consensus, certainly not something that many of us who worked on China believed in.
What about the argument that the problem, though, is that persons like yourself are actually the ones who are disconnected, that you are not connected with a fair portion of the American population who disagree with you?
The people you're describing are not just Republicans. There are a lot of Democrats who believe that too.
Exactly.
I personally come from a small town in the Midwest, and I keep in touch with my roots and my friends that I grew up with, many of whom have different ideas about China. But the American public still is more open to contact with China than the Washington. The anti-Chinese mood is much stronger in Washington than it is in America as a whole. And there is a kind of frustration on the one hand, and I must say political opportunism on the other hand of congressmen and some people in Washington who hope to get jobs in future administrations that finds it in their interest to be very tough on China. And there are many of us who hope that we can put America on a better path, but we don't know.
Are you a East Asian apologist? Are you a East Asian apologist?
There are people who call me that, but I've been quite surprised how few people call me that. I think most people treat me with respect, maybe more than I deserve, but they're open to listening. And I think most people, when I talk in various communities around the country, are interested. They want to know more. They realize they don't know that much, and they realize I'm a specialist who knows those countries better. So even in Washington, there aren't many people who call me an apologist. Of course, many of those people who are on the other side were former students of mine, or at Harvard, or other universities, or read my works. And I don't feel that I'm an apologist.
You've written a
Yes.
very authoritative book on Deng Xiaoping.
Yes. Deng Xiaoping is the one, in my view, who did more for Chinese good in the future.
Including presidency at the moment?
I believe that setting China on the course of reform and opening, taking it from the Cultural Revolution and taking it from the Great Leap Forward when China was so poor, and turning it around and laying the basis for a whole new era and guiding that process was extraordinary and put China on a new path. Deng had much more experience in Beijing, in the military, in foreign policy, and working. He was 10 years as the general secretary of the party. Xi Jinping was a regional leader whose father was in a high position in the government. And I think what he's trying to do now is take China to a new stage where it's gained strength and move it into leadership in the world. I think also that some of the issues from the Deng era, the fact that the economy was so free and open, in order to get people to move and try new things, Deng had to grant them a certain amount of freedom. So by the time Xi Jinping came to power, there was much more loose use of money, and it's fair to say that there was more corruption, and that the leader of China at that point should be doing more to stop corruption, and now leading China as a stronger power into the new world. So I think that's probably the way Xi sees his mission now that China has gained strength, of continuing to gain strength throughout the world and put it on a stable long-term basis.
What about the question of Hong Kong and Taiwan?
I think that China has not managed those places well. When he started out, if you ask a Hong Kong person, I'm a Hong Kong Chinese. And now they say, I'm Hong Kong. If you ask people in Taiwan, they would have said, I'm a Taiwan Chinese, or Chinese Taiwan. Now they say, I'm Taiwanese. And I think what the people of Hong Kong have found is that they have not had a good economic base for their current situation. They have not been listened to by other people in Hong Kong, by the higher-ups. And the combination between rich people who make a lot of money from the rents of in Hong Kong and who cooperate with Beijing and who have the high positions in the Hong Kong government organizations are very unpopular with the ordinary people.
Isn't that downplaying, though, the ideological aspect as well?
What began as a economic and social situation has become a political issue. And I think that happened several years ago when they had the so-called umbrella movement in Hong Kong. And now what the young people say is, the lesson we learned from that is that peaceful protests don't accomplish anything, that no one listens. And so they're now confronted with a much more radical situation where they have felt that the only way to get somebody to listen is to protest more radically. And it looks like now that Hong Kong will try to make some efforts, at least to correct some of the economic problems in Hong Kong by providing more low-cost housing and trying to improve the situation of some of the local people.
What do you think Beijing is going to do about, let's say, so the situation now with Taiwan?
I think it's a very delicate situation and it could be dangerous. If the United States now finds ways to elevate Taiwan to being more like an independent place that and treats its officials as if they represent a country, that Beijing, which is now very concerned in showing that it's in charge and that the goal of liberating Taiwan can now be realized, that there's a real danger of a clash over Taiwan.
But isn't it also the cold reality that any administration in Washington, D.C. would not actually be willing to have the United States go to war with China over Taiwan?
I think the problem in the Pentagon is the view that if we show any weakness toward Taiwan, the mainland might feel they could invade and get away with it. So from their point of view, the aim is to be strong and firm and unquestioned in our commitment to Taiwan, and that would prevent an invasion. But if the Chinese feel that the United States is weak or preoccupied with other issues, or that their domestic base of support is weak and they want to show that they are strong and really can come, then the risk of attacking Taiwan, I think, is real.
Ezra Vogel, thank you very much for being on In Conversation.
Thank you.